The words shimmered on the tiny screen of my phone, glowing with an almost malevolent light in the dim cabin of the transatlantic flight. You're no longer required at Arian. Effective immediately. The email notification had appeared on my phone screen as our flight reached cruising altitude, a tiny, digital death knell delivered at 37,000 feet, somewhere over the vast, uncaring expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. For a moment, the world narrowed to just those 10 words. The low hum of the engines, the soft chatter of other passengers, the clinking of the beverage cart making its slow journey down the aisle, it all faded into a distant, muffled roar. I stared at the words, certain I was hallucinating from exhaustion. It had to be a mistake. A cruel, cosmic joke. After 9 months of relentless travel that had blurred borders and time zones, after crisscrossing 4 continents and living out of a suitcase, this was my reward. After building relationships from the ground up, relationships that had taken me to the gleaming, futuristic boardrooms of Tokyo and the old world, wood-paneled conference halls of Frankfurt, this was how they chose to end it. An impersonal, surgically precise email, delivered while I was trapped in an aluminum tube, powerless to do anything but watch my career detonate. My name is Samantha Keller. I'm 42 years old, and until that precise moment, 37,000 feet above the ocean, I was Arian Global Solutions Senior Director of International Business Development. For the better part of a year, I had dedicated every waking moment, every ounce of my energy and expertise, to securing what was poised to become the largest contract in our company's history, a $950 million logistics partnership that would not just put Arian on the international map, but redraw it entirely, with our name at its center. The irony wasn't lost on me. They chose to fire me while I was literally in the air, rushing back to close the final, ceremonial piece of this monumental deal. My hands, usually so steady during high-stakes negotiations, trembled as I read the message again, and then a third time, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something less devastating. Behind me, the oblivious rhythm of business travel continued. Fellow passengers, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of their screens, typed on laptops, finalizing reports and sending their own, less world-shattering emails. Flight attendants, with practiced smiles, served drinks and packets of pretzels, completely unaware that in seat 12A, a world had just collapsed. The professional composure I had so carefully cultivated over 15 years, a mask I had worn through countless negotiations, threatened to crack. A toxic cocktail of white-hot anger and cold disbelief fought for control in my chest, a burning pressure that made it hard to breathe. What they didn't realize, what Victor Dalton and his newly assembled leadership team had so catastrophically failed to understand, was that this deal wasn't just about contracts and signatures. It wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet that could be handed off to the next suit in line. The relationships I had built with Gen Corp International in Shanghai and Alter Holdings in Munich weren't corporate transactions. They were personal bonds, forged through late-night strategy sessions over sake, shared laughter during cultural exchanges, and a level of deep, personal trust that had taken months of patient, sincere effort to establish. David Zhang, Gen Corp's formidable CEO, had told me just last week over a dim-sum lunch that he considered me family. Klaus Muller, the patriarch of Alter Holdings, a man who valued tradition and integrity above all else, had personally invited me to his daughter's wedding next spring. These weren't the kind of relationships that could be transferred with a termination email and a sterile corporate handshake. As the plane continued its inexorable journey toward what I now knew would be my final client meeting as an Arian employee, a cold, hard smile spread across my face. It was a smile devoid of warmth, a chilling rictus of pure, unadulterated resolve. Victor Dalton and his team thought they could simply step in and claim credit for my work, believing that business was just about the numbers. They had no idea what was about to happen to their carefully laid plans. The flight attendant approached with the beverage cart, her smile unwavering. "Anything for you, ma'am?" "Coffee," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the tempest raging inside me. "Black. Just like my mood." I had 6 hours until we landed. 6 hours to decide exactly how I wanted to handle the biggest betrayal of my professional career. What Victor didn't know was that loyalty, the very thing he had discarded so casually, worked both ways. And he was about to learn that lesson in the most expensive way possible. 9 months earlier, I had walked into the sleek, glass and steel headquarters of Arian Global Solutions in Charlotte, North Carolina, carrying what I believed would be the opportunity of a lifetime. Arian was a respectable, mid-sized logistics firm with a solid reputation in domestic shipping. However, international expansion had always been their white whale, an elusive prize they'd chased for years with little success. The company had built a solid reputation in domestic logistics, but previous attempts to go global had failed spectacularly, leaving a trail of costly write-offs and gun-shy executives wary of venturing beyond familiar territory. That's where I came in. My 15 years of experience in international business development, combined with my fluency in Mandarin and German, made me exactly what Arian needed to finally crack the global market. Harold Brennan, the company's CEO, was a man of the old school. He had a firm handshake, looked you in the eye when he spoke, and believed that a person's word was their bond. He had personally recruited me, seeing past the company's previous failures and putting his faith in my ability to build the kind of lasting relationships that transcend mere business deals. "Samantha," he'd said in our final interview, his office overlooking the Charlotte skyline, "we're not just hiring an employee. We're investing in a partner. This isn't about just signing papers. It's about building trust. That's the only currency that matters on the world stage." He gave me carte blanche, an unlimited travel budget, complete autonomy over negotiations, and the freedom to structure deals however I saw fit. It was everything I had ever wanted in a professional role, and I threw myself into the work with unprecedented dedication. The interview process itself had been intense, 3 rounds with different executives, each one more skeptical than the last about whether a company like ours could compete with established international players. "We've tried this before," one of the VPs had warned me. "The last person we sent overseas came back empty-handed after 6 months and $250,000 in expenses. What makes you think you can succeed where others have failed?" I had looked him straight in the eye and answered with the quiet confidence that had carried me through my entire career. "Because I don't just close deals. I build relationships. And relationships are what drive international business, not presentations or promises." The first breakthrough came in Tokyo. I spent 3 weeks there, not in boardrooms, but in smaller, more intimate settings, learning the intricate dance of Japanese business culture before even scheduling my first formal meeting. I learned about the importance of nemawashi, the informal process of laying the groundwork and building consensus behind the scenes. By the time I sat down with potential partners, I understood not just what they needed logistically, but how they preferred to conduct business. Respect, patience, and a genuine interest in their success opened doors that aggressive, American-style sales tactics had previously slammed shut. From Tokyo, I moved to Shanghai. This was the big one. Gen Corp International, a titan of Asian manufacturing. My Mandarin skills were put to the test, but it was my understanding of guanxi, the complex web of relationships and mutual obligations, that truly made the difference. I didn't just talk numbers with their CEO, David Zhang. We talked about our families, our shared love for historical literature, and the challenges of leadership. He was initially skeptical. Too many Western companies had promised partnership only to treat Chinese firms as subordinates. But I approached our relationship as equals, spending time understanding their long-term vision and finding ways Arian could genuinely support their growth. Finally, the European leg of my journey brought me to Munich, where Klaus Müller at Alter Holdings was the gatekeeper to the continent's most lucrative logistics networks. He was a stern, traditional man who valued punctuality and precision above all. I made sure I was not just on time for every meeting, but early. My German, honed during a 5-year stint in Berlin, allowed me to converse with him and his team without the clumsy filter of translators. We didn't just discuss logistics. We talked about the craftsmanship of German engineering and the future of European commerce. Each relationship had been built slowly, carefully, with countless dinners, cultural exchanges, and honest conversations about mutual goals. These weren't transactions. They were the foundations for long-term partnerships that would benefit everyone involved. Then, 6 weeks ago, the ground shifted beneath me. Harold suffered a massive heart attack. The news sent a shockwave through the company. He was recovering, but the board, in a panic, needed to show stability. They appointed an interim CEO, Victor Dalton. Victor was everything Harold wasn't. He was a creature of spreadsheets and bottom lines, a man who had built his career on taking credit for other people's work. He was politically calculating, risk-averse, and obsessed with appearances over substance. My closest ally at Arian, a sharp and loyal colleague named Jennifer Bailey, had warned me about him in hushed tones over the phone. "Be careful, Sam," she'd whispered. "Victor sees this deal as his ticket to the permanent CEO spot. He's already talking about it as if he closed it himself." I had brushed it off. The deal was 95% complete. The personal trust was established. All that was left were the final signatures. What could Victor possibly do? Now, staring at the termination email on my phone, the answer was sickeningly clear. He was firing me, the architect of the deal, to ensure that when the ink was dry, he would be the one standing in the spotlight, hailed as the company's visionary leader. My success had apparently threatened his carefully constructed image. What I didn't know during those final weeks of negotiations was that Victor had been systematically undermining my position with the board. According to office gossip I would later learn about, Victor had argued that allowing any single employee to become so central to major deals was a dangerous precedent. "We need to institutionalize these relationships," he had reportedly told the board during an emergency meeting. "Relying on one person creates too much risk. What happens if she leaves, or gets poached by a competitor? We need to establish Arian as the brand these clients want to work with, not Samantha Keller." The board, still reeling from Harold's sudden absence and worried about the company's stability, had bought into Victor's argument completely. They authorized him to transition my responsibilities to a team-based approach, effective immediately. In corporate speak, that meant firing me the moment the contracts were signed and having other executives step in to manage the relationships I had spent 9 months building. Victor's plan was breathtakingly naive. He believed that business relationships at this level were purely transactional, that David Zhang and Klaus Mahler would continue working with Arian regardless of who managed their accounts, as long as the terms remained favorable. He had no understanding of the personal trust and cultural connections that had made these deals possible in the first place. From his perspective, the timing was perfect. The contracts were 95% complete, with only final signatures needed from all parties. He could fire me, take credit for the successful negotiations, and position himself as the mastermind behind Arian's international expansion. The board would see him as a decisive leader who had successfully managed a complex transition while securing the company's future. As my plane touched down at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, I felt a mixture of fury and anticipation. Victor thought he was so clever, timing my termination to coincide with the deal's completion. He had no idea that he had just handed me the perfect opportunity to demonstrate exactly how wrong he was about the nature of international business relationships. The $950 million lesson he was about to receive would be one that neither he nor the board would ever forget. The airport terminal felt surreal. Travelers rushed past me toward their connections, their faces a blur of purpose and destination. I stood motionless for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what Victor Dalton had just done. 9 months of my life, countless flights, missed family gatherings, and professional relationships built on trust and mutual respect, all dismissed with a single, corporate email sent while I was trapped in an aluminum tube at 37,000 feet. I called an Uber instead of using the company car service, a small but symbolic gesture of independence. During the 20-minute ride to my apartment in downtown Charlotte, I began planning my response. Victor clearly expected me to slink away quietly, perhaps fight the termination through legal channels or human resources. He had no idea what kind of storm he had just unleashed. My phone rang as I unlocked my front door. It was David Zhang, calling from Shanghai. His number appeared on the screen, and I answered with a forced calm that belied the anger burning in my chest. "Samantha, my friend," David's warm voice carried across the Pacific. "I wanted to confirm our schedule for tomorrow's final signature ceremony. My team is very excited to complete this partnership with Arian." "David, we need to talk," I said, settling into my living room chair. "There's been an unexpected development on Arian's side that you should know about." I explained the situation as diplomatically as possible, watching the city lights twinkle outside my window while David processed the information. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before he spoke again, his voice noticeably cooler. "They terminated you while you were traveling to finalize our agreement? After 9 months of building this relationship together?" "That's correct," I confirmed. "Effective immediately, according to the email I received mid-flight." Another pause, this one even longer. When David spoke again, his tone had shifted from friendly to business formal. "Samantha, you understand that Gen Corp International entered this agreement based on our personal relationship and trust in your expertise. We have worked together through cultural barriers, regulatory challenges, and complex negotiations because we believed in your commitment to our mutual success." "I understand completely," I replied, knowing exactly where this conversation was heading. "Then you will also understand," he continued, his voice now like ice, "that Gen Corp cannot proceed with an organization that treats its most valuable employees in such a manner. If Arian believes they can simply replace you and continue as if nothing has changed, they have severely misjudged the nature of international business relationships." My heart rate quickened as David continued. "I will be sending a formal notification to Arian tomorrow morning withdrawing from all negotiations. Gen Corp International will not be moving forward with this partnership." The first domino had fallen, exactly as I had hoped it would. But David wasn't finished. "However," he said, his voice warming again, "I would be very interested in discussing future opportunities with whatever organization is fortunate enough to secure your services next. Your reputation in international logistics is exceptional, and Gen Corp values loyalty and competence above all else." After ending the call with David, I immediately dialed Klaus Mahler in Munich. It was early morning there, but Klaus was an early riser who often started his day with coffee and international news. He answered on the second ring. "Samantha, perfect timing. I was just reviewing the final contract terms for tomorrow's meeting. Everything looks excellent." "Klaus, I'm afraid there's been a complication," I began, then explained the situation with the same measured tone I had used with David. Klaus's reaction was even more explosive than David's had been.
"Mein Gott.
They fired you by email while you were traveling on their behalf. This is not how serious business is conducted, Samantha. This is not how partners treat their most valuable assets." "I wanted you to hear it from me directly before you heard from Arian," I said. "You can be certain that Alter Holdings will not be proceeding with any organization that operates in such an unprofessional manner," Klaus declared. "This partnership was built on trust in you, your expertise, and your integrity. If Arian believes they can simply substitute personnel at this level without consequences, they understand nothing about European business culture." 2 phone calls. 2 withdrawn partnerships. $950 million evaporating into thin air. By 9 a.m. the next morning, Victor Dalton's carefully orchestrated plan was crumbling faster than he could comprehend. I had spent the evening crafting formal emails to both David and Klaus, providing them with the professional language they could use in their withdrawal notifications to Arian. I wanted to ensure that when Victor tried to salvage the situation, he would face absolutely clear rejections that left no room for misinterpretation. My phone started buzzing at 8:30 a.m. with missed calls from Arian's main number. Victor had apparently arrived at the office to find formal withdrawal notifications from both Gen Corp International and Alter Holdings waiting in his inbox. According to sources I still had inside the company, his assistant could hear him shouting through his closed office door. The third call came directly to my personal phone, Victor's number flashing on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering with professional detachment. "Samantha, What have you done? Victor's voice was strained, barely controlled. Good morning, Victor, I replied calmly. I assume you're calling about the inevitable consequences of your decision to terminate me via email while I was traveling on company business. This is sabotage, he accused. You deliberately poisoned these relationships out of spite. On the contrary, I said, enjoying every word. I simply informed our former clients about the change in personnel as a standard professional courtesy. Their decisions to withdraw were entirely their own, based on their assessment of Arian's commitment to honoring business relationships. I could hear papers shuffling frantically in the background, probably looking for my original contract. This isn't over, Samantha. You think you can destroy 9 months of work because your feelings got hurt. I didn't destroy anything, Victor. You did that the moment you sent that termination email. I simply informed valued business partners about a change that affected their contracts. Everything that happened afterward was a direct result of your decision to prioritize internal politics over client relationships. The board meeting is at 10 a.m., Victor said, his voice now carrying a note of desperation. If you reconsider and come back, we can make this all go away. Triple your salary, equity participation, whatever you want. That's very generous, I replied. But I'm afraid my new position at Strathen comes with significantly better compensation and the respect I should have received at Arian. Goodbye, Victor. Best of luck explaining to the board how you managed to lose $950 million in a single morning. The emergency board meeting at Arian was scheduled for 10 a.m., but by 11:30 a.m., Victor Dalton was no longer the interim chief executive officer. Word traveled fast through Charlotte's business community, and by noon, local news outlets were reporting on Arian's spectacular failure to close what would have been the largest deal in the company's history. Stock prices had fallen to their lowest point in 5 years, and analysts were questioning the company's long-term viability in global markets. The irony was delicious. Victor Dalton had fired me to prevent any single employee from becoming too central to major deals, but his actions had achieved exactly the opposite result. My departure had taken with it not just the immediate contracts, but any hope of Arian establishing credibility in international business circles. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of Strathen Global's new international headquarters, watching the local business news coverage of Arian's quarterly earnings report. The numbers were even worse than anyone had predicted. Not only had they lost the $950 million deal with GenCorp and Alter Holdings, but their reputation for unreliability had spread throughout the international logistics community. Arian Global Solutions reported a 34% decline in revenue this quarter, the news anchor announced, following the loss of what industry experts are calling the largest international partnership in the company's history. The contrast couldn't have been starker. At Arian, I had spent 9 months carefully building these relationships, only to have them destroyed by executive arrogance and poor judgment. At Strathen, those same relationships were being welcomed and valued, with both clients expressing enthusiasm about working with a company that understood the importance of personal trust in international business. The final act of poetic justice came when Harold Brennan called me personally to extend an offer I never saw coming. Arian's board of directors had apparently spent months analyzing what went wrong with their international expansion, and they had reached an inevitable conclusion. They needed me back. Samantha, Harold began during our phone conversation, I know this might sound impossible after what Victor put you through, but the board has authorized me to make you an offer that reflects how badly we mishandled this situation. The offer was staggering. Chief Executive Officer of International Operations, a newly created position that would make me the highest paid executive in Arian's history, stock options, an unlimited travel budget, complete autonomy over international strategy, and a formal apology from the board of directors. Harold, I appreciate the gesture, I replied, but I'm quite happy at Strathen. We've built something extraordinary here. I understand, but please consider it. Arian isn't the same company without your expertise. I had spent weeks deciding how to respond to what I knew would eventually come. Tell you what, Harold, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I'll consider a consulting arrangement. Strathen could provide strategic guidance to help Arian rebuild their international reputation. Our fee would be $5 million per quarter, with a minimum 2-year commitment. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. You want Arian to pay Strathen $10 million per year for consulting services? That's correct, I said. Consider it tuition for the business lesson Victor provided. If Arian is serious about learning from their mistakes, they'll invest in proper guidance from professionals who understand international relationship management. Harold ultimately declined, but the offer itself was the perfect conclusion to this corporate drama. Victor's $950 million mistake had not only destroyed Arian's international prospects, but had positioned their primary competitor, my new company, as the dominant force in global logistics partnerships. Looking back on the revenge that unfolded naturally from Victor's own arrogance, I realized that sometimes the best victories are the ones where you simply step aside and let people destroy themselves.